Fucking young Frank Furt School on Twitter told me to tell you on air that you have a small PP.
Oh,
That's all.
I mean, okay.
Already, we've said all of these structures are to be knocked down. None of them are to be present.
Hello and welcome to the Young Hegelians podcast. With us today is Wendy, or @ActuallyDong.
Hello, my work has been described as a disgusting use of the plight of trans people to further trounce on Indigenous American sovereignty.
We have Alison, or @ToxicityFemme.
I'm just a Marxist.
We have Mayo, or @YesMustard.
I'm best known for describing Wendy's work as a disgusting use of the plight of trans people to further trounce on Indigenous American sovereignty.
We have Vikky, or @deathpigeon.
I'm gay 12.
We have Young Neocon, or @YoungNeocon.
Hi, everybody. I'm the local opportunist here.
And myself, Zia, @ZiaNitori. And with us today is Muke, or Xexizy.
Hi, I'm the leader of the Libertarian Leninist movement with a name that you can't pronounce.
Awesome. And Muke recently released a video on the topic of anti-work, which is the topic of this episode.
Wait, really?
Oh, shit. Yeah.
Oh my god.
Oh, I should watch that video
Oh, shit.
and read up on this topic.
Not just you, Vikky. Everybody should watch that video.
God damn.
Yeah,
I did, but I
Everyone the
forgot.
world over.
I hear it's a good video.
So, going from this, I guess a good place to start is talking about what is anti-work? How are we going to define it? And a good place to start is defining work to begin with. I think Young had some good takes on that.
Yeah, I mean, well, work has like several different meanings, in its most fundamental sense. It's the usage of energy to transform matter. I mean, that's Bertrand Russell's definition in Praise of Idleness, which is, anti-work. But, there's also, a kind of like biological concept of work. Organisms use energy to get energy. And like, that's all great, that kind of work, whatever. But the conflation that people make is between that and the social structure of work. And that refers to a specific historical, a constellation of structures and institutions. In modern capitalism, that, wage labor, coercion, alienated labor, and so on. But like work as an institution doesn't have to take that specific form. It's just any coerced or it's like structurally coerced activity one has to do for, production, consumption, whatever, for the society, right? So it's an institutionalized, regimented, socially structured occupation.
Can we then make a distinction between physically and structurally coerced labor? Between like, I pointed a gun at you and you wouldn't get food if you didn't do this?
Yeah, so there's like a bunch of different ways we can discuss coercion. The most obvious form of coercion is when the state says, if you don't do this, you get killed or whatever. And this happens directly. Military forces will go into places and just force people to work, or indirectly with like taxes which mediate. If you don't pay them, you go to prison. You need to work to pay taxes, unless you're rich. But then, so there's like multiple ways that happens. But then there's the implicit one, which is that if you don't work, you starve. So like that's implicit, or it's like not a direct form of coercion, but it is a form of coercion, especially because if you live in a society where like the common goods have been enclosed, so people can't just like use means of production for their own uses. And what's more, if mobility is restricted, so you can't leave, then like it's coercive. I mean, if those two things weren't true, in theory, you could just leave or just produce for yourself. But that doesn't work. I mean, and there are plenty of people who just can't work. So, like, that doesn't even necessarily, that could still be coercive. So, I mean, but fundamentally, it requires a threat of violence or physical obstruction of movement, and then the implicit or explicit threat of harm, deprivation, or death. And that's like a pretty broad catch-all definition of coercion, and it sits behind basically work in all societies. I don't care if it's capitalist, feudal, actually existing socialism, or ancient Mesopotamia. I mean, the concept of work has changed, right? So in the late 19th century, it became really associated with this almost Protestant idea of like a calling. This is Max Weber discusses this history. The professions arose, and you got a job, and that really sort of institutionalized and became very sort of popular during the the golden age of capitalism, as they call it, that all the socialism sentimentalized. And this is the idea of like that, this is literally the idea that work makes you free. I mean, this is like, that's literally what the idea is. So it's just like, and it's this very Protestant idea. Now, that's a specific cultural gloss on work.
So in this podcast, we're anti-Arbeit macht frei.
We are. I am. I mean, I think that's I think that's one of the most evil ideologies in history. But it's just so. I mean, there is a specifically capitalist form of work and specifically modernist capitalist form, specifically Protestant or whatever, and like the job and the other thing. So that's all true, and that differentiates it from other places. But that doesn't exhaust work as any sort of coercive, regimented occupation. I mean, it's just, one kind of debate we were having is whether or not we could call it like useful activity or efficient activity or something. And that, I mean, or like what the difference between that is. I think it's key that like work has to exist in a social structure where like production, consumption, and reproduction are not for like direct use, fulfillment of needs and wants, but are for the sake of the system itself, basically, and reproducing it in its class system and its mode of production and its means of production. So, I mean, there's a kind of almost aggregate way you can look at work, take yourself out of the individual, and you can look at like what why is this being regimented and coerced for the society? I mean, and then that makes occupations much more clear. But not everything has to be useful for the society, as long as it has enough to reproduce itself. So plenty of jobs are in fact, bullshit, as David Graeber calls it, the term. But that doesn't negate that like that work is you're still coerced to work in one of those bullshit jobs, and that it's stratified, regimented, and so on. I mean, so yeah, work is an institution. It's a social institution. It's a way of organizing human time and space, energy and effort. It's coercive, but this can be either directly or indirectly. We should probably also say that you can force people with force and like with fraud and deceit, like trick people into doing things too. That's still coercive. And it has a specific history. The modern modernist version is very, very like kind of like unique in a way. It has inflections of all these Protestant and modernist and scientific ideologies and all these sentimental views of like, the job and the calling or whatever. So that's a very specific form. But I mean, I would probably say that like not every settled society has had waged labor, but every settled society has, at least for most people, but they didn't have jobs. That's the thing I want to clarify. So that's probably a more specific kind of like, you know what I'm saying? So it wasn't like, oh, you got hired, or whatever. You had a boss. Yeah. So, I mean, and I don't want to because I don't want to stretch it too much to make it historically anachronistic, right? Like at the end of the day, there's similarities between, someone producing grain in ancient Mesopotamia and someone who's like working as regional vice president for human affairs or whatever, human resources. I mean, these are totally different social structures, totally different and totally different whatever. So at that point, that does start to stretch the definition of work. But that's actually, I think, important because people have identified, they pretend that they're talking about the first definition I said, which is like manipulating energy and matter or acquiring energy and matter.
Or just like any human activity ever.
Right, or any necessary human activity.
Or just labor in general.
Right. But then they assume, or implicitly they assume that only the modern way of doing our way of organizing works and jobs is like the only way. And sometimes they'll say, oh, that's not true. Like there's this other form of non-waged labor, which isn't alienated, it's exploitative, but it's still work. And I mean, we'll get to this in the episode or whatever, but I would contend that they are still having internalized the concept that our current modern form of work is the only kind that ever has existed. And so they equate useful activity, efficient, productive, survival, necessary, manipulative activity with a specific set of regimented, coerced occupations and employments. So it's a very dangerous conflation, because not only can work look very differently across culture, space, times, and social structures, there are societies that don't have work as the way I am describing it. I mean, it strains credulity to call, nomadic pastoral foragers as working. I mean, it just doesn't even, like, both for conceptually and substantively, right? They don't have regimentation, they aren't coerced, and they only spend it's like 8 to 20 hours on productive activities every week or whatever. It's just like a very low amount of time. So in all these different ways, one thing with conflation is that a lot of people say, oh, we can't abolish work until we have full automation. I want to point out that I really don't like this formulation, because it's true that in substance we could reduce amount of work to near zero, although that almost certainly wouldn't happen. But it would still, you could have like the social structure of work exist even if there's like 0 people in it, if that makes sense, because like it obtains over a social structure. It doesn't obtain over like the actual amount or kind of production or job. So total automation, you could still have a scarcity society. I mean, Star Trek has got it like this. They still have work even though they don't have scarcity, and they have full automation. So that's a great example. Like that's like why it's more a social concept. It's not.
I feel like it's a really easy mistake to make for like new leftists. I mean, it's kind of hard to like picture something other than a capitalistic social structure. But
I think that's true. But I think the older you get, the harder it is. But I mean, we've been told from day one, over and over and over, that to survive, and if you don't work, you're lazy, and work implies ability, and da 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 da. And like, we're told this from day one. We see our parents go to work every day. We go to school. We're it's structured by employment. And by the time you're an adult, like it's just incredibly difficult to disentangle these ideas, because conflating these different definitions is like necessary to like maintain that ideology. Because just like if you naturalize it, if you make the specific way of organizing human activity, coercively organizing human activity, and you make it seem like it's necessary, like the expenditure of effort, then everyone's gonna just see it as a necessary evil at worst, or and then so yeah. But
yeah, I think that's a interesting point actually, because obviously people are bought into this and grown up around it. I mean, school is obviously modeled around getting people ready for the capitalist workplace in the working day, such that when you get to the point in your adult life and you begin to start questioning these ideas, or talking to people who are questioning these ideas, your very first gut instincts, it's almost like the concept of anti-work is almost traumatic to your worldview at first. And I feel like
that's literally true.
Yeah, I feel like everybody here and every leftist or anybody listening would have gone through the exact same process, where the very first time they heard about these ideas, it was met with this immediate reaction in their minds. It was like, just no, that just doesn't work.
It's a utopia.
It's right. Where it's just instant denial, where it's like, how that wouldn't work. People wouldn't work if they didn't have to. A society would collapse. We'd all starve. It doesn't make any sense. But and I feel like that's actually obviously something that a lot of newer leftists tend to forget. Older leftists tend to forget about how this process that newer ones or even liberals have to go through, where they have to spend time kind of marinating on things such that they can overcome this kind of entrenched ideology in them, because we've all had to go through it.
It's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of work.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing about the incoming new leftists is that because there are so many that don't go through this marination, you wind up with a good deal of them that have been around for a while that haven't marinated, so the new ones that come in after them don't marinate either, and it's this like
We want tasty leftists.
Well, I mean, yeah, I'm assuming I'm obviously talking about leftists who actually understand what they're talking about. But yeah, it's a good point that it's so ingrained in us that even those who suppose themselves revolutionaries can't even bring themselves to go over it, and unless they're thinking about some mythical society 100 years into the future, which they have no way of actually conceptualizing in the first place. But anything that they can look at and think might be realistic in their lifetimes, they always respond with, well, no, of course we can't do away with work in these societies. That's how bad it is that even the revolutionaries themselves can't escape it.
Well, I think a lot of them don't want to, though. I think a lot of them believe. I think a lot of them would deny that this is an ideology. Deny that, like, I mean, of course, everybody denies their ideology is an ideology, but like, I mean, what I mean to say is that I'm not even convinced that even if they didn't make this conflation at a certain point, that all these leftists would come over to that position, because I think, like, I don't know, especially among like social democrats and who I call the trad left, like they genuinely sentimentalize and aestheticize and like worship like the 9-to-5 job, having a house, a car, it's like 1950s shit, but it's just like, and I think, and it's like literally the idea where there isn't work actually, it's not even that it just like contradicts them. They literally don't like that idea. They want a society that forces people to work.
There's lots of people who seem to think that you only get meaning through work. Without work, we'd live meaningless lives, which are sad and brutish and blah de blah.
And Mark said that, don't you know?
Mark said what?
No, it's people.
Mark
people
said Albert Mark Frey.
Oh, he did, yeah. I read that one passage.
He penned it.
Yeah.
So I think
he stood out in front of the gates and wrote it himself.
Well, I think it is actually a fact that work is probably the most meaningful thing to people's lives at the current moment. But what we find, however, is that like if a retiree, for example, has friends and resources and the family and enough to survive and relationships and hobbies, they're just as happy as they were when they were in work. Like the reason that not having a job like hurts people so much is twofold. Like, one is that you don't buy food, or you don't have whatever. Or three, you're bored because you don't have any other activities you can do. And then three, like you're socially stigmatized. Like that's why people don't like it.
So the way society is built is that you go work, right? So there's no thing for you if you don't. There's nowhere where you're going to be doing productive activity if you don't have a job, right?
I don't think so. Right? Yeah. I mean, unless you're rich.
There's also another group of people that they pretend to sympathize with the anti-work position, but say, "Oh, it's just not practical." Mandatory work has to exist, otherwise who's gonna actually make the food? Like, we need a structure, we need a state that coerces people into work for a 9-to-5. Stop being a utopian. And this is
people like 9-to-5,
Yeah.
Like,
People love
the ones who go on. Sorry, what, sir?
People love to shoot down any implication that life or society could be of a higher quality than now, because it implies that there's something wrong with society, which is scary.
Well, even among leftists, though, like they'll just they'll have this like thought of this is like they can't escape that initial liberal mindset.
Right, like I think a specific quote on this is that our goal is not to abolish work, but to make it less coercive or something, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, so I was always about to say, like, it's not even necessarily coercing them into a 9-to-5. The leftists who come out and say they're pro-work, they'll always be like, yeah, we have to work, but we're only going to have to work, maybe 4 or even 3 hours a day because, we're not going to have to produce surplus labor, so it'll be way better and blah, blah, blah.
That's what the folk people say, but literally the ML say 35 hours.
Well, that's a whole different thing.
Oh yeah,
but
PSL
this
and Keynes.
Sorry.
Like Keynes was way more progressive. He was saying, "Oh yeah, you only have to work 4 hours a day, whenever." And then PSL was like, "Oh yeah, 50-hour work week by whenever, or 70." I don't remember the exact number.
I feel like that's kind of you could kind of get into a different topic there, where it's that's the result of people fetishizing the worker as well.
I think so.
You almost don't want to abolish the worker or work because it's the noble plight of the worker that we have to fucking champion in society. But anyway,
against the rootless cosmopolitans.
Yeah. I think the fetishizing workers is an important part of the opposition to anti-work. So the anti-work is really the pro-worker, right? I mean, Trump, he's pro-worker, but anti-work, right? Or he's pro-work. Fuck.
I paired with this the mandatory work thing is the mandatory work for reparations to the global south, which is it's a hell of a position. The first thing that off the bat is just like, this is obviously utopian, but it's not even a good utopia. Like, what are you doing?
You can describe the typical negative Marxist adjectives. It's utopian. It's very moralistic. It's this. You could describe it either retributively, like say, for every hour that you enjoyed the fruits of the global South's labor, you have to work for an hour in the gulag or whatever. Or you could be a little bit more optimistic and say that they're arguing from a place of need, that it will be necessary to distribute products of labor from the first world to the third, which in a sense can be a very easy thing to agree with, if not for the implications that come to the side of it of coercion.
It also seems interesting to me because, reparations as a demand makes a lot of sense within capitalism and the state, and also seems like a great way to try to speed up the collapse of both. But once you've gotten rid of either or both of those, it ceases to be of the same thing, because there's no there's no longer going to be active repression of the same way of people in the global south, of marginalized people in first world countries. I mean, just and $10 to one, if people try to fuck shit up with them, they're just going to kick their asses. You know what I mean? So just it would be a different. It would already be just a totally. It doesn't make sense. It's just, unless you're conceiving of money and commodities or capital. I mean,
it's logistically impossible to repress that many people.
The trouble is that they are thinking of it in socialist money and socialist commodities, though.
They are.
It's
and
almost
socialist
entirely
capital
different.
and socialist capitalism.
Socialist surplus extraction, socialist wage labor.
I mean,
So
the
I
extent
think
of their
it's kind of
understanding is the direct seizure of their current workplaces, and then them going 9 to 5. But now they have a commissar that they can go and make requests to.
Now they get a new boss.
Who's actually, they are their own bosses, but the commissar is the working class. Anyway.
Well,
no.
I want a boss with a fucking rad hammer and sickle pat. That would be really cool.
Yeah.
Socialist billionaires,
Yeah. So I feel like pointing that out about socialist commodity reduction and socialist money, blah blah blah. It kind of shows how this is actually a deeper issue. At least when you're talking about specifically, socialist work. And the idea that just because it's less hours, that makes it socialist. And I think you can kind of apply that to every aspect of these people's ideas of socialism. It's less profit orientated, so it's socialist. It's less hours, so it's socialist. It's less mean, so it's socialist. I mean, that's just fucking liberalism. We all know that. But obviously, because they need to stay in these confines of predetermined, actually existing socialism, quote unquote. But I feel like... Hold on, just So I feel like even though talking specifically about this reparations idea, though, you don't even have to deal with these deeper issues to talk about that, because that on its own is just complete bullshit. So when you're talking about specifically, the work under socialism at all, you do need to kind of hit on these deeper points of reading Marx. But this idea of we're gonna have to work because of reparations. That's just its own out there like absolutely, I don't even know where to begin with how ridiculous that is. That can be argued on its own grounding for just how batshit it is, you know. Obviously in practical makes no sense, is patronizing incredibly as well, and yeah, you can go on for a while, but so I feel like that can even be detached from the fact that they are already thinking in socialist money and socialist commodities, because they are, but even if they weren't, it's just anyway, sorry, Neocom, what were you gonna say?
I was just going to make a point, though, is that even if you call it socialist commodity production, if you have some commissar setting aside sectoral balances and taking the capital, the produced commodities of one person, and then assigning them to production elsewhere, not for consumption, to help like create this balance, post hoc balance or whatever, that you might call that socialist commodity production. But that's just, that's indistinguishable from what a corporation does. So it's just like
right. The socialist commodity production is not a simulacrum. It's mockery, because they believe that it is. There are people that do think it is socialist, which it is emphatically not.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that as a podcast that's half Marxist, half anarchist, but everybody here is from had some experience with Marx's work, it'd be easy to think about anti-work in terms of what stage of society we're talking about exactly. So there's the immediate revolutionary society in the dictatorship of the proletariat, lower phase and higher phase communism. Even people that don't consider themselves anti-work will think that, obviously work won't exist no matter your conception in higher phase communism, or what some would call communism proper. I'm
not sure everybody believes that.
It depends on what you mean by work there.
Common.
The majority of MLs do believe that higher phase communism would be workless.
Yeah, but there are people who genuinely believe that no matter how far into communism we get, we're always going to have work, because that's just the way it is.
And the way that I'm thinking about it is that you don't need to guarantee individual means of consumption of like these the necessities to live for it to abolish work. You can just have socialized means of production and a society where people are free to leave, like Young was talking about before. And already in a dictatorship of the proletariat, it seems like you've largely eroded the institution
of work.
So I feel like
I don't think that's fair.
All right. Well,
do we consider actually existing socialism to be a form of?
No, we don't.
Okay, then fine. Then but see, I'm an anarchist, so I just have how are you?
I know, but read Marx.
How are you like dividing the dictatorship of the proletariat in this scenario?
Right.
Let me read it out to you. Let me read it out to you.
Don't read me the Marx. I'm asking you.
Oh. Well, that's what I usually get, because the phrasing is what's the important here. So you keep talking. I'll fish the thing out.
I was just going to say quickly, like this topic is well, if we're going to talk about lower higher phase and then Marxists as well. Or actually, anarchists even as well. We need to kind of dwell on the very definitions of what counts as the start of lower phase and the start of the end of dictatorship of the proletariat, because that's often something that's interpreted in different ways across many different tendencies, and I imagine differently with anarchists. Because now, correct me if I'm wrong, but anarchists don't believe we're going to have a dictatorship of the proletariat or something like that, or
that's not up to them though.
Right, I know, but
it depends on what we mean by dictatorship of the proletariat.
Exactly. So for every Marxist, I hear three definitions of the dictatorship of the proletariat. So some of the time I think that's fine and the issue is only semantic, but some of the time I listen to what they say and I'm like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. So it's really weird, because I feel like it's just whatever the text Marx says is just the way people gloss it is always incredibly like weird. So it's so variant that I don't even know what that means, because like if it just means any organization of power to like defend against the resurgence of capitalism or something, like
no, it's not that.
Right. But that's like some MLs try to play that trick, and that's what
a lot of MLs tend to think that the dictatorship of the proletariat is itself socialism.
Let me read it out to you. This is a very important section. It goes from, I think, let me see. It's in the third address of the Civil War in France, Chapter 5, the Paris Commune. That's where I got this from. And it says, but the working class cannot simply lay hold of the ready-made state machinery and wield it for its own purposes. The centralized state power with its ubiquitous organs of standing army, police, bureaucracy, clergy, and judicature, organs wrought after the plan of systemic and hierarchic divisions of labor originating from the days of absolute monarchy, serving the nascent middle class. So here he's describing a bourgeois dictatorship or a bourgeois state, and blah, blah, blah. Mighty weapon in a struggle against the feudalism, still in developing, remain, blah, 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 blah. So you can already see what some of the things that are not supposed to be present in there, right? And then let me go to section A here at the bottom, because there's a very lovely editor's note here which points to something. There we go. While the merely repressive organs of the old government were to be amputated, its legitimate functions were to be wrested from the authority usurping preeminence over society itself and restored to the responsible agents of society. Instead of deciding once every three or 6 years which members of the ruling class was to misrepresent the people in Parliament, universal suffrage was to serve the people, constituted in communes, as individual suffrage serves every employer and the search for workmen and managers' business. It is well known that companies, like individuals, in matters of real businesses generally know how to put the right man in the right place, and if they for once make a mistake, to redress it promptly. On the other hand, nothing could be more foreign in the spirit of commune than to supersede universal suffrage by hierarchical investiture. And the editor's note is kind of important here. A top-down system of appointment of officials is a bourgeois system, for Marx. Right? So with those very basic things, we can already see that the MLs don't even meet the minimum for that definition, right?
And even with that definition though, like, again, because people gloss it in very different ways about what they think it'll look like, right? So in theory, in just like how it's described, like in the minimalist interpretation, which is maximally strict on what it would allow, I would probably support it. I mean, it would probably just be a semantic difference then. But the more general, the more abstract, the more broad, the less we restrict its possibilities. Then that's when I start to get worried. So, right? I mean, I want to look out for any fucking person who's going to try to reestablish some state control over people. So I just and sometimes well-intentioned people play right into that too. So it's just like
the point of this was to give a more determined picture of work in society over time and how that related to the mode of production. But if the theoretical differences between us makes it difficult to talk about, or just ambiguities in general, not particularly between us, makes it difficult to discuss, to use these as useful terms, then we could just skip it and go on to alienation or some other topic.
Well, I think it's like fine. Yeah, I think it's. I mean, I don't know if we will though. But in this, at least one podcast, but I think it's fine that we disagree on it. This is what I was, saying is like, because we have a large concept of anti-work that we do agree on, and communism that we do agree on. So it doesn't matter that we disagree because we can just mix and match.
Yeah,
right.
I'm happy to talk about the dictatorship of the proletariat question for a bit.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting because there was a question left on Muke's video about will coercive work be necessary in a dictatorship of the proletariat, and right. that was really interesting. And what were you going to say about that one, Muke?
So yeah, I mean that kind of ties into what I wanted to say as well. So Neocon, you were talking earlier about like what does a dictatorship of the proletariat look like, and we have many instances of these throughout history. I mean, I think one interpretation that I'm quite lenient towards is it's the revolution itself. But I think what Mayo brought up kind of reaffirms this very important point at the same time. You know, it's smashing old state apparatus. What's the plural of apparatus?
Apparati.
Apparati.
Are you sure?
Or is it apparatuses? Apparatuses?
Apparatuses sound better. Yeah. Anyway, so it's smashing these state apparatus, and it's replacing them with new state apparatus. And now I can hear you on the edge of your seat, like about to jump at me here. So hold on. But
it's already not what they mean by state, though. Right?
Sorry?
It's already not what they mean by state. And the anarchists, they try to say hierarchy, but most of them include an extra.
But here's the thing. A dictatorship of the proletariat is, by its very definition, what makes it so important. A hierarchy. It's a hierarchy above the bourgeois.
But not internally. Its own internal structure is entirely different. No.
It still kind of is internally.
Hierarchy. No. Listen. The one they're concerned with is hierarchical division of labor, right? Not all of them. Well,
division of labor is a separate point from the state.
Right. But that's usually what they mean when they say hierarchy.
But here's the thing:
right?
A representative democracy is a type of hierarchy.
Yes.
And a dictatorship of the proletariat is a representative democracy.
Sure.
So
in a way, yes.
Yes, definitely. In the same way that, a captain on a boat is, right?
Yeah. But
to go back to that Engels quote. But
I know.
So anyway, let me finish. Just so we've seen a dictatorship of the proletariat in a very explicit form in revolutionary Catalonia, where they've constructed new state apparatuses which were using hierarchies, justified or not, to oppress the bourgeois and the fascists. That's what it existed for. So that's what it looks like.
I'm sorry to cut you in here, but there's this very weird understanding. The anarchists don't mean hierarchy in the same way you and I do, right? This is coming from an ex-anarchist. Most of them will include asterisks, and they'll show you exactly what they mean.
To be fair, most of my people can't read, so I mean,
yeah.
Do we really want to trust them? I mean,
no. I mean, the ones who penned the theory down. The ones who penned the theory, not the ones who say they read it. Yeah.
But I feel like that's a bit detached from the point. But anyway,
no.
I do get where you're.
Yeah.
But to go back to this work question then quickly. So the question. So I kind of wanted to lay that out real quickly as kind of what a dictatorship of the proletariat is and what it looks like. And let's just, for the sake of argument, go with the Marxist definitions from now. Reconstruction of proletariat state apparatus, a explicit oppression of the bourgeois and counter-revolutionaries, blah blah blah. So this time during its existence, this revolutionary period is clearly a self-evidently turmoil-filled one. So I think personally, and also as well, this is another point where we kind of have to distinguish how we feel about it compared to how MLs and some Trotskyists do, where, no, I don't think the dictatorship of the proletariat is socialism, right? Because I think it should be fair enough that it's either capitalism or perhaps you can say in its short burst of life, a non-mode of production. Right, because it's not something that it's not something that can continuate itself. It's not something that is designed to last for a prolonged amount of time.
And so, with that definition, the USSR, China, all these places failed to be .ps after a certain point.
They were, but only initially. It's when they stagnated and essentially reestablished themselves in global capitalism that they were no longer dictatorship of the proletariat. But during that actual revolutionary phase, when where they were oppressing ex-bourgeois and fascist counter-revolutionaries, they totally were. The USSR under Lenin and even initially China under Mao, I'm willing to say were dictatorships of the proletariat, but they regressed back to essentially just state capitalism. And you can essentially say that, I think, yes, you can essentially say that dictatorships of the proletariat, even in that known mode of production, are maybe closer to state capitalism. I think that would make sense. But so in that sense, then, when we're talking about these states and these societies which are filled with turmoil and exist to explicitly oppress people, it would make sense, in my view, that some form of mandatory work would be necessary. However, at the same time, this is just my speculation. I don't think it's something that can be set in stone and written in theory as a guideline. I think it has to be explicitly organic. Right, it has to be taken at the. Sorry, just to let me finish this point. It just has to be taken at the given context at the given time, depending on the needs of the specific revolutionaries. Anyway, what were you going to say?
So, but like, okay, let's talk about like just okay. Are we saying this .p is in a single geographic country, or has it spread to the entire globe? Like, what stage are we at? Where are we in that?
I would say in the revolutionary period, it tends to be in the more civil war part. You know,
right. I would say the second it becomes its own country, it's failed.
And so what I'm saying is that what if the Civil War generalized to the entire world, right? And so every state.
Well, we've never really seen an instance like that, so we can't really comment.
But if it was occurring in every single country at once, right? Like,
look, I think one of two things would happen. You'd have a series of like allied dictatorships of the proletariat, or maybe infighting ones, depending on different tendencies, or maybe they would collate into one kind of amorphous blob of dictatorship as a proletariat. I don't know, but that's a situation we've never seen in history before, so it's very difficult to talk about.
Right, but what I'm saying is that if it truly ever really got that far, I mean, like, what we call oppressing the bourgeois wouldn't even really matter anymore because they would just not exist at that point.
Well, yeah, that's literally how it transitions into socialism.
Sure. So, but the getting from the A to B is the golden question. So that's all.
We're all working with the definition of socialism, where it's just lower phase communism, right?
Of course.
Yeah. So, I think the important point for me is that there isn't a dictatorship of the proletariat, because it's shaped by its particular circumstances and the particular time and place in which it's happening. And you can see, like, in all the examples Muke has given, compare early USSR, early China, revolutionary Catalonia, the Paris Commune. All of these look very different, even though they do share some basic characteristics, and there are reasons to discount some situations as dictatorship of the proletariat. It's not like there's only one way for the dictatorship of the proletariat to look. And in some formulations of the dictatorship of the proletariat, there would be this enforcement of work, while in others there probably wouldn't. And it depends upon our circumstances, what we need, and how it ends up being constituted as a result.
That's essentially what I was saying, yeah. I'd say the only difference is that I would say most of the time it probably would be required. That would just mean that's my kind of like feeling about it, though. It's speculation.
Right.
To the extent that that's the case, though, that would totally like undercut my. To the extent that would be necessarily the case, that would just basically undercut my optimism at all for winning at all. Basically, that's because like the way that extraction and enclosure and all these systems work out, right? Their general continuation, especially in a system where everything would be like rapidly like collapsing or whatever, the throughput demands they're going to make on the planet are just going to be absurd. And I mean, it's just like. And like the destruction to the earth that's going to happen because of it. It's like not like because of the direct fighting itself is going to be absurd. So it's just like, and I mean, I just like, as long as there's coercive work, there's the chance that can institutionalize and continue itself. And so like, and then
in the form of like a bureaucracy, you're saying?
Yes, or like a proto-state. And so like, I mean, because hierarchical structures like that, stratified structures of occupations and so on, do have a strong tendency to reproduce themselves. That's the thing they're best at doing in history. Like, they're not really efficient ways of organizing production in terms of output or resource usage, but they are efficient at keeping themselves going. That's like the thing that they're really good at.
Okay, but I think you have to think about why these structures exist in the first place, because state structures just don't exist on their own and then continue themselves for the sake of it. They exist to prop up a mode of production, and when we're talking about a socialist mode of production trying to be established, that's very counterintuitive to having a state perpetuate itself. I think you need to contextualize it a bit with why it exists and what end it's serving towards. And furthermore, I mean, even ignoring that, the fact alone that the dictatorship of the proletariat is an incredibly unique state, which, as Engels says, from its very inception, almost negates itself as a state, isn't a state in the proper sense of the word.
Right.
Right.
And,
we just went over that why.
But I think what Young's concern is that if we constitute this relation of production such that we are enforcing work, that enforcement of work tends to reproduce itself and tends to produce modes of production, which tends to produce modes of production which produce states.
Right, but that's
why though.
Mayo, did you want
to the bureaucracy that would arise from
nothing, right?
That system would
Already, we've said all of these structures are to be knocked down. None of them are to be present within the.
This would be establishing another structure. Is that wrong?
What do you mean by another structure?
So the coercive structure to make work, at least in some cases,
to account for it, right? To make sure that everything's the coerced laborers are going where they
no one ever claimed there's going to be disappearing in the lower or in .p or even lower phase.
No. So. I think Young's worry is that if it's especially coercive, that system which enforces it could give rise to a bureaucracy which would perpetuate things longer than it should.
I mean,
what is a bureaucracy?
Just a quick gloss here. I mean, the empirical point about this stuff being self-reproductive by whatever means holds whether we're talking about Marxian or non-Marxian assumptions. But I think that this is actually an area where I just fundamentally agree on things because I do not theorize the state as dependent. So I just that's a place I don't think we agree. I don't know if we're gonna,
right.
And I don't think we will, to be honest. So
could Mayo just get his point out though?
What is the point though? Everyone's.
Well,
I'm sorry. It disappeared. It just disappeared.
Well, we're talking about why the dictatorship of the proletariat and how it might have the tendency to reproduce itself. And obviously, I think you were asking the very valid question of why would it do that? And I think, that's what we have to ask. We essentially have to think, why does the state exist? To what end does it serve? And it's a very, very different one and a very different nature to any other state that we see continue reproducing itself today. And that is why, essentially, because it's a different game. I don't know if you want to add to that, though.
It's just fundamentally weird to me how the proletarians could revolt, eliminate all these things, and after a while just say we want to prop them all up again, rather than getting rid of all the other ones.
I think that the crux of it is property, right? Because even under the dictatorship of the proletariat, you have communally owned property, not to the same extent that you would under a proper communist society, but still,
listen, if you're
ownership of the means of production.
If you're going to use that one, I'm going to say it's also in lower phase, and I can pull the quotes out for you if you mean property, because I would establish that property, that definition that you're using, would be equivalent to divisions of labor.
Sorry, could you clarify on what you're talking about?
Because in Marx, okay, let me pull up the German ideology.
No, so what did you think I was saying?
Wait. What if we table the state questions? Because I think we actually have a lot of slight and larger disagreements.
Sure, but all I wanted to add on is that
discussion.
All I wanted to add on is that the state exists to enforce property relations and continue all the production of capitalism with the class hierarchies. But all of these reasons for the state existing are abolished with the dictatorship of the proletariat. Right? So the dictatorship of the proletariat exists to maintain new property relations which negate themselves, the communally owned property, and the threats that are the existing bourgeois and the fascists. And once they're no longer a threat, the very purpose of the dictatorship of the proletariat is gone. So therefore, there's no reason for it to perpetuate itself anymore. Again, it's a completely different context and nature to the current state because it exists for completely different reasons.
Right. So anyway, again, I think this is an area of fundamental because I don't have that same theory
for sure. We can move on. I just kind of wanted to make it abundantly clear my position there. So that's fine.
To me, the state is an autonomous structure. I mean, so there's quite a bit of literature on this.
Really?
So I mean, yes, I mean that's what the empirical, that's this. What's it, the academic scholarly literature?
Right. Yeah,
so
we can move on, but that's definitely a hot take.
It's just no. So it's like if you look at the predictiveness and the explanatory power of the models, the ones that predict are the best at predicting politics and law and bureaucratization and so on are models that assume the state is autonomous. and for war and for a bunch of other things. So it's just, I mean, anyway, it's a longer conversation, but I think, yeah, it's just...
Most
that's a
anarchists even think
conversation that we might actually be having
right,
on episode 3.
That's a different
Yeah, we should
episode.
table that
It
for
is.
now.
It really
for
is.
sure.
But that baffles me, honestly.
But I think, I mean, that's why, you know, we should, because we have areas of lapping and agreement on anti-work, and then areas of disagreement. So like the areas we agree on are things like abolishing wage labor and abolishing work always being the eventual goal, for example.
And the area of agreement is also that this is all gone necessarily by lower phase communism.
Okay,
and the only thing we're quibbling over is different
well,
things.
Mayo didn't necessarily think that it was gone by lower phase communism,
No, I
depending
don't
on the
think that.
definition.
Sorry,
Depending on
yeah.
the
So I'm
definition of
actually
work,
curious as to what Mayo was going to say there.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've been going through some confusing research, or not research, reading. Marx noted several things in which he would call property, right? Which he would call communal, feudal, etc., etc., right?
Mhm.
And the reason for this is given simultaneously the distribution and indeed the unequal distribution, both quantitative and qualitative, of labor and its products, hence property. The nucleus, the first form of which lies in the family, where wife and children are the slaves of the husband, this latent slavery in the family, throughout very crude, is the first property. So, but even at this early stage, it corresponds perfectly to the definition of modern economists who call it the power of disposing the labor power of others. Division of labor and private property. Okay, you should take this private property here and then just change it with property. The private property understanding would be this more modern understanding of it, right? Where some guy actually owns the thing. It's not like a state does or a community does, etc., right? So division of labor and private property are, moreover, identical expression, and one and the same thing is affirmed with reference to activity as it is affirmed with the other in reference to the product of the activity. Right? So further, the division of... so already we can see that for him, at least, the end of property, quote unquote, not private property as we understand it like right now, right? But is this division is equivalent to this division of labor. So for me, I would say that quote unquote property still hasn't disappeared in the lower phase, and neither has labor or the division of labor.
Even in the lower.
Yeah,
because property is
division of labor. They're they're equivalent.
Yeah, I was going to say dependent on, but that's the wrong word. Yeah.
Right. But for this theory here, it doesn't matter whether this is done by a state, whether this is done by nature itself, in the form of of needing people to actually work for subsistence. Right, like Marx wouldn't care that they didn't have exactly specified dates and times because there was a definite necessity at a minimum, right, of which their labor is productive and turns out a product, right? So if I need 3 meals to eat a day and it takes me 3 hours to make those 3 meals, then it would still be there.
Okay. Yeah, I think I don't think I was necessarily saying anything counter to that though, was I?
I'm not sure what the original conversation is about anymore.
Well, I was talking about how under even the dictatorship of the proletariat, there would be some property would pretty much be, if not communally, definitely collectively. And there is obviously a big difference there, where with collectively you still do have, I think, the division of labor, but I think communally, that's essentially abolishing the concept of property itself.
If you want to define it that way, you can.
Okay. I don't think that's necessarily too controversial.
Well, no, it's just a pedant in me. You can say that just fine.
No, I mean, I'm curious. Like, give me this politically correct. Like,
because the communal property would also be that of the Inca state. Or even the what do you call it? The Indian communes that he pointed out. Those would all technically count as communal property, but still wouldn't count as the abolition thereby, right? It would not be the end of divisions of labor. In fact, those were the beginnings of things called what do you call them? Not classes? Is that what they were? Where you had the people who did the footwork and the handwork and the bodywork and the mind work. You know what I'm talking about? Hinduism.
Yeah.
The caste system.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. Okay. I get what you're saying. Yeah. So I think the differentiation there then would be I'm talking about in the context of socialism. So even though on their own these things don't necessarily have to lead to these conclusions of abolition of division of labor and things like that, I think in the context of socialism it naturally would. Right. So I guess I'm just pulling a few more assumptions when I say that. But yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Yes, your assumption is the proletariat.
Yeah. Anyway, how about we move on then to the next topic?
Yeah. So one of the and this is going to really set off the pedant in you, is one of the more amazing objections we've seen is that you need a division of labor to transport food. And this seems to be conflating this idea of specialization with division of labor. And it's amazing.
So do you want to flesh out on this argument at all?
It's pretty ridiculous on its own. The idea that we need specific people whose sole job it is to go and deliver mail to you in order for mail to ever be delivered that's
coercively enforced by some sort of structure. I mean, like right.
But it's their sole thing, right? So why would one person do one thing only for their whole lives? If you get what I mean.
Of course. But why would we do most of the things we do? Like so many of the tasks we do now, if we just had more control over our lives, we just wouldn't even do.
Yeah.
And that was actually listed as an objection. Like, oh, there are going to be people who don't want to do certain things, and one of them is oh wait, there are going to be all these groups of jobs that are necessities for people. And if people just choose not to do them, like it's this really infantile idea of and it essentially will go back to this we need to coerce labor, and that seems to be where most of the objections are. It is between. It's not even necessarily about anti-work. It's about anti-coercion of work in lower phase communism.
Many of these are just anti-communist rhetoric.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, what was it? Fisherman in the morning, huntsman in the evening, farmer in the afternoon. I'm paraphrasing, but if they read, what was it, Goethe?
I have all this up in my video, by the way. But
German ideology is where that's from.
Ideology, yeah. And it really is anti-communist because the wording was unbelievable. It's like, well, if one person is a scientist and then they decide they want to be a doctor, we can't let them do it. It's like, no, because we can. We exactly fucking can. What are you talking about?
It's also great because what these reveal to me is that many people just literally do not understand. They don't do the research on this, so they don't know that in the doctor example, that doctors, as a professionalized doctors, provide the vast minority of healthcare, and most healthcare come from prevention, sanitation, nutrition, housing, social relations, low primary care, antibiotics, vaccines, and 99%. I don't know. There's some military study where they found they could save money by giving nurses a 3-week anesthesiology course, and then they could perform the same as a doctor. Except in the crisis cases, and that's where you doctor. So it's just that kind of case. It's just as a specific example, these people they are naturalizing they're not even naturalizing the current world. They're naturalizing the ideology of the current world because they don't even understand that the ideology doesn't correspond to the reality. Production in general is like this, right? Everybody buys into the idea that we do not produce enough for people, but that's false. We produce substantially more than there are people in the world. I mean, it's just
my favorite statistic is how much milk they dump every year.
Of course,
I mean, there's always the one that I bring up from Oxfam about how we produce 17% more food per person than is required to feed the whole world. So that's at the final point of distribution. At the initiator in the global north, it's 3 times as much, and it gets 75% gets thrown away through all the processes. And in the global south, the reason that balances out at all is because they have to. Many of their crops are for export instead of for themselves. So
like if they were just growing their own food, they would probably have the same amount of or similar amount of overproduction that we have, less because they would have less capital intensive agriculture, but they would still produce vastly more than they would need specifically to survive. Right? Like if permaculture can produce 90% of what shitty agriculture can do, then, and if we're producing 3 times as much, then that means that permaculture would still overproduce 2.7. You know what I mean? So it's just like it's just funny to me that people don't understand that like scarcity doesn't define human condition in aggregate. It's actually abundance in physical terms.
Well, it's abundance and artificial scarcity, right?
Yes.
What what Jason Hickel would say about capitalism and why degrowth needs to be a thing.
Hell yeah, degrowth.
And I think degrowth is fundamentally tied to work abolition or anti-work because, like, it's funny. Of all people, Dan Dennett made this point, which is that if, like, he said the single best thing that the global South should do as it capitalizes and modernizes is basically just cut the work week down to like 10 hours because we already produce enough for everybody anyway, and they might as well just say fuck you to the global north and then just like make their society based around perpetual vacations. And then it's just like, I thought it's so funny that Dan Dennett, this like annoying asshole, said that. It's just like he's such a jerk, but like I don't know. It's just, people really don't understand. People actually don't even understand how much production or time and labor goes into destroying stuff. That if we didn't destroy, we would have so much more, right? It's like prisons and militaries are forms of destruction. Like that's what they do. They erode our physical base. So I mean, like it's just like if you stop doing all the things that destroy produce and you stop doing all the things that overproduce, you're going to get everybody's going to work, or expend activity 1/10 of the time. It's not going to be coerced, and we're all still going to have enough to eat. Right? It's just like it's just the numbers work. It's just like, you know what I mean. And most people, it's always revelatory to me that just people don't even bother to look at the composition of occupations and labor and stuff. I mean, there's been a sociology of labor now for literally 125 years. It's like not like economics of labor. It literally asks these questions, like how is it organized? What's the structure? What's the hierarchy? What does it produce? What's the da-da-da? And like people don't even think to look in that direction. It's just really funny to me, but it's just and almost.
Well, I think in the context of work, that it's actually almost irrelevant. The fact that we produce loads. I think if you want to talk about degrowth, which is worth talking about, then it's. Then you should definitely these points are very important. But if we are talking about,
and that sounds like a future podcast episode.
But if we are talking about, do we have to work or not? I think it's actually largely irrelevant because it's much more easily dealt with the point of people are going to work either way, regardless of if we have enough food to sustain ourselves or enough resources for shelter and whatever. People are going to want to work. They're not going to just sit around and do nothing.
Or they're going to want to do useful activities,
Exactly. But, so naturally, these needs are going to be met regardless of whether or not we already have the abundance to them. And that I feel like is what all you have to say for this topic of specifically work.
Sure. And that's what the point I made in the beginning about Falk and how some people say automation is necessary, but clearly isn't. It's neither necessary nor sufficient. My point is that, and I said, it's actually about a social structure. So yes. But since so many people make the physical objection, I think it's very important because they need to understand.
If people was actually making that argument, then you can easily counter it. But I'm saying
And part of it's that because people don't understand how much scarcity is enforced, nor they don't understand that enforced scarcity is the flip side of the institution of work. So it's just like the two disappear at the same time, right? They're like the same. They're one thing because. Work is a way to enforce scarcity.
It's the whole idea of having to have that major distinction between a small amount of people who own and the majority of who don't, such that to perpetuate wage labor.
You mean the more the laborer labors, the less he has?
And that's the other problem thing about with rebuttals to anti-work is that if you there's a whole host of characteristics that if you get those right, like work will just disappear anyway. Like if you don't have enforcement, if you don't have prisons, for example, or you don't have commodity production, and you don't have property, and you don't have enforced like settlement, and you don't have enclosure or whatever, work is just not going to exist as an institution. It's just going to disappear. So a lot of people's objections to anti-work amount to the fact that they don't even realize that like some of their own beliefs forbid the possibility of work on its own.
Yeah. One thing that's really difficult to deal with when talking to a lot of these people is they treat it like this is a moral statement about what we should do immediately upon revolution, and it's not that. It's really not. It's more of at least for me, it tends to be more of a description of how things will necessarily end up being if we are working towards socialism after a revolution.
So I think I actually do believe in the value of moral arguments, but I think that
of course you made a really good case for that.
But I think the problem is that they're also moralistic about it, and they're individualistic about it, and so it undercuts any structural thing they
like
claim
liberalism.
to have. Exactly, and it's just like I don't know, it's just I don't know. It's really weird to me.
Not everyone says woke as you.
Well, no, they have to become unwoke to become like me.
I will never be woke.
Yeah, I'm unwoke. It's wokeness horseshoe theory. By becoming the least woke possible, I actually become the most woke possible.
So does that mean Hitler actually saved everyone?
No, that's not how that works.
Yeah.
No, Hitler was a woke girl. Come on.
Hitler became so woke, he became unwoke.
Yeah, please
I see.
Hitler's pronouns.
Yeah, it's a horseshoe, not a circle. That's why Hitler doesn't circle back. I got it now.
Yes.
So what do we what have we got up next?
Huh? Oh, you want me to get into alienation? So there's several places. Actually, let me just ask: would it be all right if I just talked just like for a second about what he means by it? At least what he means by work.
Of course. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, just a quick thing. I think I'm going to run to the restroom, but just wait. Yeah. So, but now, Doc. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, at least you won't be there to yell at me.
I'll be here to yell at you.
I'm gonna have to go through the German ideology for this.
1 second
This
only.
podcast is now a German ideology reading group. I hope everyone's correct.
Well, the reason why this one is so good is the things that were formulated in 1844, at least its philosophical parts, were like well structured and then written out in a better format in here. So this one is actually better to understand than what's in the 1844 thing, right? And you should always supersede what's written here over the 1844 thing. That was an elaboration of thoughts, and this is the finalization, at least. You know.
Well, I believe it was like Althusser or somebody else that said that the German ideology was like the first mature work by Marx. For he really got his shit together.
Really? It was you who said the German ideology was the original shitpost.
The original shitpost. I love it. Okay, so in history up till the present, there's certainly empirical fact that separate individuals have, with the broadening of their activity into world historical activity, become more and more enslaved under a power alien to them. A pressure which they have a pressure which they have conceived as a dirty trick on the part of the so-called universal spirit. So already right there we're starting to see that this alienation thing isn't so spiritual or as subjective as you might get from reading the 1844 thing, right? And then afterwards when it goes, this alienation can of course only be abolished given two practical premises: for it to become an intolerable power, i.e. a power against which men make a revolution, it needs to be an actually existing one, alienation, and people need to revolt against it. Right, but here's the bottom one, which is incredibly important to the last thing, right? Because in the lower phase, and the abolition will be done of the value form, right? Which is one alienation turned into a reification. so long as we consider alienation to be material powers separated from man, i.e. the actual subject of these powers. So then afterwards he goes and says, okay. And on the other hand, this development of productive forces, which implies the actual empirical existence of men in the world history instead of local being, is an absolutely necessary practical premise, because without it, want is merely made general, and with the destitution, the struggle for necessities, and the old filthy business would necessarily be reproduced. Of course, he doesn't mean exactly that private property might resurface. The thing here is the persistence of that division of labor would be a thing almost guaranteed. Right, and this wouldn't need to be like this weird thing where a bunch of people get together and then decide that they're not going to do any work and you're going to do it, and then they force you into it or whatever. This could very well proceed under the this very benevolent guise where we all get together and then decide that this much is necessary to work. At the moment that you've already established this point, which is absolutely a bottom, right, of the amount of work necessary to be established, you've already alienated yourself from, I think, what he calls nature. Right?
Yeah,
and
one
this
thing
nature would be...
I ended up doing a lot is I would call just sort of what I'm now calling atomization and some of the more social effects of capitalism on people, alienation, and
it's social alienation. But yeah, it gets difficult if we're conflating technical terms to talk about these issues.
Yeah. And on top of this, if you don't buy that he kept it after this, right? Here's a little nice quote from
he uses a different term for alienation in Capital, but that's just like such a insignificant point.
Well, that's because already in like German ideology, he ditches the term because he already understands what it is. He's done with the term, and he's gonna toss it to the philosophers. This quote-unquote alienation, to use a term which will be comprehensible to the philosopher, can of course only be abolished given two practical premises, right? It's all this is just him distancing himself from the other Hegelians. It's not like he actually ditched the method, right? The realm of freedom really begins only where labor is determined by necessity and external dependency ends. It lies by its very nature beyond the sphere of material production proper. Just as the savage must wrestle with nature to satisfy his needs, to maintain and reproduce his life, so must civilized man. And he must do so in all forms of society and under all possible modes of production. This realm of natural necessity expands with this development because his needs do too, but the productive forces to satisfy these expand at the same time. Freedom in this sphere can consist only in this, that socialized man, the associated producer, already he's abolished all these extra alienations, right? He governs the human metabolism with nature in a rational way. He brings it under his collective control instead of being dominated, but is a blind power, a la value, and accomplish it with the least expenditure of energy and conditions most worthy to appropriate with his human nature. Basically, the organization of production is already made subject to the subject, i.e. the worker or the proletariat, if you want to call it that way. Energy and conditions most worthy and appropriate for their human nature. So this is lower phase. But this always remains a realm of necessity. The true realm of freedom, the development of human powers, is an end in itself, begins beyond it. Though it can only flourish with this realm of the necessity as its basis. The reduction of the working day is its basic prerequisite. So yeah, kind of important to understand this whole concept and its relatedness to his other works, if you want to arrive at a Marxian understanding of freedom from labor, I guess, or anti-work.
Is Young back now?
Yes.
Okay, hi. So I just gave my talk while you were away.
I think I heard the tail end of it.
Oh, quick question then, Mayo. So what would you say then would be the best literature to deal with this topic of alienation? Would it be German ideology, or was that just because it had a nice quote?
That one had a nice quote.
Or maybe just Capital itself. But I mean, as far as I understand, alienation isn't really dwelled on too much in Capital.
Yeah, it's a subtle thing that you have to learn how to pick up. And like reading 1844 thing will show you when he uses it.
Right.
How it affects
1844 manuscripts then.
Yeah. But that's if you want to read it for yourself to be able to apply this later on.
Of course. But that's obviously, an important thing to pick up in reading Marx. So yeah, cool. I just for people listening and myself, just
Yeah. So if you read Volume 1 and if you read Commodity Fetishism, that place would be like the ideal like elaboration of the whole thing after you read the 1844
because
thing.
Commodity Fetishism is meant to be a mature extension to alienation in Marx's more mature years.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So the neocon, sorry, you can yeah.
Well, actually, it's an interesting point because this is something we talked about. One of our first discussions was about the sort of the rhetorical glosses on this stuff and how, like, there's one way of reading the Marx. I mean, arguably, I think we'd all agree the correct way, but that, like, work abolition is the same thing as just erasing distinction between work and the rest of life. Did you read the "Labor becomes life's prime want" quote?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, so like in the Goth GF critique, but so like there's several ways to read that, right? I think, and way that like MLs and like trad left socialisms read it is they read it like literally. They think like, oh yeah, everyone's gonna love to work now or whatever. Like, it's like, I'm like, how are you gonna do that? What are you gonna shoot me if I don't love you? But then,
please, sir, put more hours on the social plan.
But if it's just the abolition of that between work and the rest of life in a good way by making everything like free and non-coerced and just for use and for pleasure and socially useful things, just like consensually and whatever.
The realization of my human
that's
essence.
tantamount to abolishing work.
Or at least
so. Yeah. And I've expressed some reservations about the rhetorical gloss on it in that formulation, but because I think it leads to this other one. But in terms of what it actually refers to, its denotation, I think we agree on that one, for example. And I think that we use the correct reading of the Marx.
Thank you.
Although it should be said, Marx did have a lot of weird little Protestant hang-ups about work, and like and not that this affects his writings that much, or not that it should. But he said he wanted to live in Texas and he wanted to have a suburban house.
That might have been like his own immediate thing, because the guy also bought what do you call them? Stocks and bonds in his later part of his life.
Marx wanted to be a trad wife.
Yeah, I think he just
Marx
gave up.
If you know this.
But like, I would agree with you.
Labor coin, comrade.
Like, there's this weird thing between Marx the person, Marx the theoretician, where, like, in one part, he'll be like, oh, the abolition of nationalities and race distinctions, and
then he'll say something really racist.
And he'll call people
So I wouldn't dig too much into, like, what he personally thinks over what he's written as, like, this very nice theory, which holds together very well.
Sure, I think that's true, but a lot of people make a cult of personality out of him, and that's where the problem starts to begin.
Yeah. No, I got you.
Like, same thing with Stalin too. I mean, these guys were all Puritans. They were boring. They were just like, they didn't like to fuck around. Oh, Marx liked to fuck around and party, actually. But he had a lot of infidelity and he drank a lot or whatever. But like, so good. He's not a total loser. But Stalin was a loser anyway.
Magno was where it's at. Magno fucking cross-dressed. Like, let's go.
Oh man, he would have.
Magno was trying.
No, I think Magno is a femboy, so not as cool.
No, Magno started a trans ethno state in the Ukraine.
Holy shit! That's why it had to be shut down. It was too powerful.
Yes.
Yeah, it was actually the British time cops that went and fucking killed him.
I hate those guys.
Trotsky and the Red Army were just acting on behalf of Native Americans in Ukraine.
Yes. Listen,
the Red Army was just being so fucking cis when they shut down the Transno state in Ukraine.
But it's, it's funny though, it's like when people talk about this specifically on the indigenous issue and stuff like that, it's like when people talk about what they think this means, right? They always you push, not when you're talking to actually indigenous people who are very specific about what they mean when they say they want independent. I mean, it varies quite a bit, but it's very specific. But when people speak on behalf of others, like which they do all the time, their conception of what this is going to look like is you push them on a little bit. Like the other day, that conversation we had, and it always devolves into something horrible, like really quickly. Like they're like, oh yes, like all white people are going to leave North America. All are going to be kicked out of North America. All Israelis will be kicked out of Palestine violently. Like all this stuff. Just like they want mass forced movements of people. These whatever.
Brown ethnostates whip ass.
And it's just so funny to me because it's like, wait, the spirit of reparations is about abolishing. I mean, our current system is based off the extraction of blood and sweat and life and accumulation of these lives and their destruction. So like reparations is about fixing that and healing that, whatever. It's not about punishment, and it's not about and it's not about
it's about running out of ammo as fast as possible.
and it's not about punishment, and it's not about like, I don't know, like commodity production. It's just like not that I'm the expert on it, but like, I mean, most people, it just seems so weird. It's like, why not? I mean, again, these people just don't even read the authors at hand. They don't read like black feminist authors. They don't read indigenous scholars. It's so it's like they don't even, it's just weird to me. It's just like, I don't know.
To me, it reminds me of Nakam, right? The plan to murder as many Germans as Germans killed Jews, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but let's be real. That was great.
I mean, yeah, we should murder all the Germans. That is a good thing.
Nakam now.
but for independent reasons of anything. But and that's like one of the, like, it's funny that's become an objection to anti-work, because it just like it reveals that people, I don't know. It's so weird to me. I mean, yeah. It's not a revelation that a lot of people just don't read and just think emotionally, but it's just sometimes it's so intense, it's so extreme that it's just like this whole gloss on life where everything is like this aesthetic meme, and like everything is this like slogan, and it's all LARPing, and they're all imagining that they're going to be the central planner that decides everything. That's like always their fantasy, that they're going to be the one pulling the string. They're the ones who are going to decide what's efficient production or whatever. And it's like, that's always the subtle thing. And it's just so funny to me. It's just like it's like, the question is, does your vision for the world involve does it require you to exist? It's just like would your system function without you in it? And if you think that's not possible or whatever, if you think that you're inseparable from your movement success, then it shows that you have a bad ideology.
Yeah. And I guess we've come full circle and discovered that the people who are mad at Wendy's book are just liberals. I
think the aestheticizing and the sloganeering stuff plays into a lot of bad leftism in general, right? So people who are against my book, which is not about a trans ethno state, even though it might fool you, are against it for aesthetic reasons, right? Not because of theoretical ones. But if we expand that, right? If we expand that to anti-work, they're against anti-work because they see socialism as white guys hitting an anvil with a steel hammer, right?
They definitely do. Or they think of it as like that in reverse, and like white people in prison. Is that
right? The photo of Martin Luther King like laughing as like the black people whip the whites with the belts. I love that photo. If this goes on funny. YouTube, please put that up on the screen.
It's just it's just so weird. I think, I say that if one of the ways we can say instead of anti-work, post-work, right? Like if we're post-work, we're not going to need that institution or a lot of even that physical structure anymore. But
I'm post-work because I'm posting all day on Twitter.com, baby.
Yes, that's alienated posting labor. I'm
post-work because no one will hire me.
Oh well, that's just being reserve army of the unemployed. But
fucking phrase at the end. Oh man.
of the neat yeet.
Gang.
What? Oh, wait, so I don't know. I mean, I like the term. I actually like that anti-work riles people up. but it's because it gets the whatever. But if you're talking in a more sober or quieter or less offensive context, like post-work works better too. Actually, this is one thing I want to talk about, because another thing that always happens in these anti-work conversations, very, very quickly, it devolves into them talking about ability and need and want, and what a legitimate want is and what an illegitimate want. Legitimate need is what an illegitimate want is, and what legitimate ability and illegitimate ability is. And they always have these weird moral frameworks around that, and then they have these absurd epistemologies about how they would discover that. They just assume that all bias, all unconscious bias will be gone, all systemic deprivation will have like that, as though somehow oppressed people, like the minute they're no longer, the oppressive structure no longer exists, immediately just snap into like whatever. Like it's just like, and so sometimes they say, and this is even in the our essay you post, because actually it's central to a lot of these issues, which is that like I always ask them, okay, who determines who's going to be able to work, and who enforces it, and whatever. And then they really very quickly reveal that they have a very normative understanding of the body, and of ability, and of disability, and of neurodivergence, and of legitimate pathology and illegitimate pathology. And it's always incredibly normative and exclusive and discriminatory. And then they have this idea that it's going to be unproblematically enforced by this unbiased like commissar or whatever. It's like, you're reestablishing an incredibly ableistic system, among other things, and also one that very quickly is going to turn into a self-perpetuating, stigmatized prison system again. It's just like, it's so weird to me that people, think
it doesn't
this
turn
way.
into a prison system if you just execute people for not working.
Yes, that's true. That is just
good
the
job.
genocide.
Now you've given them another idea.
Yes. That's just, what's funny is because like their whole premise, like their view of how many people, like what kind of people deserve to die and who's not worth it, again, conflicts with the facts. Because if you tally up all the things they think are worthy of just like execution or lifelong imprisonment, it's like 50% of the population of the world have done them. So it's just like they don't understand. They don't know that. People don't look at these stats. So it's just like, which I don't know.
Well, that's why they're the trad left, because they have this ridiculous idea of sin, whether it's the sin from the Bible or the sin from what Stalin has said, right?
And
like taking drugs.
There's people I've talked with about anti-work, and they're like, oh, we should have doctors go and assess people's ability to work, and have doctors in some neutral, unbiased way that doctors totally can do, assess whether or not you can do that work, and if they, in their neutral, unbiased way, which totally could happen, and decide that you can't work, you get to go scot-free, and then everyone else has to work, and that does not work at all.
Everyone's going to pretend to not be able to work, so then they won't have to work. First of all,
if we just set up cameras in everybody's homes,
right?
So we
Exactly.
know
Right. And like have this sort of like two-way, like a screen, and it's like vertical, and sometimes it'll have like this guy's face, like Stalin maybe, and it'll be like he's watching you. He's keeping you safe, and
he's
he's
like
able
a
to like
big
communicate
brother.
to you through it.
Right.
Yeah, I was
And, it's like soon because that system is going to cost a lot of resources and cause mass declines in prosperity. So then they're going to have like, how are they going to care for the disabled people? Then they're going to have those same doctors decide which ones are not truly worth keeping around, and that's just like goes back to Arbeit macht frei, why this ideology is so fucking dangerous. And it's just like this is something I talked about last time. Is I think that retribution and prisons are fundamentally connected to work as an institution, because as Bernard Harcourt points out in his book, it's like the myth of the free market or something. He basically says how like coercive prisons and retribution and racist structures and stratifying violent structures and policing and surveillance accompany every transition to a work regime basically everywhere in capitalism, and arguably in socialism too. So it's just like people don't realize that just like they have an ideology which entails like first of all an unworkable and incoherent system, but one that the closest approximation is fascism. I mean, it's just I don't know. I mean, it's just people get really mad when I say this. They think I'm attacking them personally, but no, I'm making just a general point that like people they need to be more like I don't know, just that if the objections to anti-work just like allow for absurdly coercive and wasteful societies or whatever with these weird things, it's just like clearly like perhaps you should rethink your objection. Anyway, that's all. I think that's maybe like the last anyway.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think a proper ending to the first episode is us concluding that MLs are reactionaries. So with that incredibly inflammatory,
well, but all my MLs who are MUFOs, I still love you though.
I love all of my ML friends. If you're not a friend of mine, fuck you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes. Well, I mean, and then only if they follow back.
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
So
that's entailed in friend.
But I think we can safely tuck Marxist-Leninists, the majority of them, and alongside fascists under utopian socialists. Rather, they don't believe in a utopia, but rather this horrible, horrible dystopia. So I would like to move that we refer to them henceforth as dystopian socialists.
That's actually a really good name, yeah.
There's already a term, though, and it's called crude communist. And I want to bring it back from the 1844s.
Is that like crude oil? Do we have to
there's also Kasernenkommunismus.
Oh, you mean vulgar Marxist? Vulgar Marxist?
Yeah, exactly that.
Yeah, I hate those people.
So we've got barracks communism, right? We've got vulgar Marxism. We've got utopian socialism, dystopian socialism. We have a whole arsenal.
So many tendencies to choose from.
We should start identifying as like things that are called like that. So we should be like, oh yeah, we believe in a degenerated worker state. Like we should just like that. Like the most like esoteric, like weird internal communist criticisms. Oh no, I am a barracks communist. I'm a war communist.
I identify as a wrecker.
Society.